友，下午好，我是曾斌，ACP 的现任副会长。感谢大家呢，现在能够来参加我们这次就是说领导能力培养和职业发展的一个论坛。这次就是说我们有幸呢能邀请来的能到场的2位是都具有30年就是说职场成功经验人士的这个专家，一位是 John Kirk， 另外一个是 Richard Peter。现在呢，我就先把他们的背景大概的介绍一下，好吧？然后他们就讲他们的 presentation。首先John Kirk 先生，我用英文讲呢，就是说因为大家都懂。A recognized international executive with over 30 years experience in CEO coaching, corporate strategy, process improvement, and outsourcing. John Kirk is a leading authority in global business development and management. In his past career, he was Covensis Vice President, a KPMG partner, IBM Corporate Principal, and Dun & Bradstreet Software Senior Manager. Mr. Kirk has an established reputation in the field of global management advisory. John Kirk's international background makes him uniquely qualified in his field. In his early years, he lived and was educated in Europe, and his experience continued to shape a deep appreciation for international culture and the nuisance of international businesses. In his current role as a CEO and managing partner of J. Phillips Partners, he consults and provides CEO coaching for primarily Fortune 100 to Fortune 500 companies. Now please join me to welcome John Kirk.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me in the back? All right. If you can, then we'll put the microphone on. But in preparing for today, we were chatting, and we felt the best way for me to relay my story is to go back through my background and talk about my careers, my career moves, what I've learned, the mistakes I've made. Sometimes I think the mistakes are more than what I learned, but we'll share those anyway. And just kind of walk down this story of where I've been and where I'm going. So let's start with, if I can get this right. The first thing that I advise everyone, individuals and businesses, to do is have a purpose statement. Okay? A purpose statement is something you're really going to live by. It's not going to change, but without that purpose, then you could really go anywhere. Career, everything. So, I want to share with you, this is the purpose statement that I come up with and that I use. It's basically sharing knowledge around the world, one person or one organization at a time. So if I'm looking at making a decision on doing a project or a career move, I ask myself, will that move fulfill this? If it does, then I'll take a look at it. If it doesn't, then I'll probably pass it by. So to me, leadership, which I'll weave through this, starts with a purpose. What is your purpose in life? What is a company's purpose in life? So I start with that. Then, guiding principles is the second thing that I look at. So early on, my father was in the military, and it was important to him and to me that you have principles. You have things you live by. To me, a leader does just that. They have their principles. They don't compromise from their principles. So this is a list of the ones that I follow. Again, I recommend that everyone put together their own principles as well as their purpose statement. It will serve you well. So then let's talk about my early years. My dad being in the military, we lived in Europe for 8 years of my growing up time. And I lived in Germany, I lived in France a couple of times. What that allowed me to do was to understand other countries, peoples, cultures, languages, which was a tremendous plus for me as an individual, especially being an American. Because if I'm solely indoctrinated into the American way, I couldn't have done what I did over the years. So you have a tremendous opportunity already because you know at least a couple of cultures, maybe more than that. So I applaud that. Use that to your advantage. It is not a negative, it's an advantage. So I just want to share with you that I did spend quite a bit of years outside the U.S. growing up, and it had a big influence on me. So when I look at career, I actually have had 3 career paths. I like to say that I reinvent myself every few years, try something new. It's been fun, and I'm looking forward to the next time that I reinvent myself, which is coming soon. But I've had 3 career paths: human resources, software, and then consulting. But I learned a lesson along the way. The lesson was that careers need to be managed, not just evolve willy-nilly. I didn't do that early on. And so I had a lot of different jobs and different opportunities. And someone would call me and say, "John, we've got another opportunity." And I would go, "Great. Do I make more money?" "Yeah." "Cool. Okay. Is it a bigger title?" "Yeah." "Okay, let's do it." Well, I wasn't really managing my career, but I learned over time you need to do that. So think about career management. Don't just let it evolve. So let's kind of go down some details with some other lessons learned. During the human resources time, I worked with several companies. US-based, local, national, international, several different companies. The one that is quite interesting though, well, there's 2. Frito-Lay, I had the opportunity to go into a company in a manufacturing plant that has been around for a long time, but the plant was not performing. And so management was trying to turn this operation around, and the idea, I was in human resources, so I had the plant, was to go figure out why we're not producing what we should be producing and making a profit. Well, the first thing I did, I went to the plant floor and I talked to the people. And I worked first shift and second shift and third shift. And I found out what is the problem. So in management and leadership especially, you have to ask questions. You have to be able to go out and find out what's going on. Then you can make decisions, put programs in place. Well, we did put a program in place which turned the plant around, and then Frito-Lay adopted that throughout their organization. The other one was Coca-Cola. It was quite an experience. It had been really the first time that I started back doing international types of things since I'd lived overseas early on. And at Coke, I had the employment responsibility for Coke USA, but we were also trying to get Coca-Cola into other countries around the world. At that time, we were able to get some what's called allied flavors, which is grape and orange and those kinds of things into China, into Russia. But we also had a tremendous initiative to get Coca-Cola into China. And I remember every day people would be coming back from China with all kinds of artifacts and some nice things that we were able to enjoy. But that international connection I found quite rewarding, to say the least. So those are 2 that I remember along those lines. If we move on to software, Dun & Bradstreet Software, which is based here in Atlanta, or was started by some Georgia Tech folks. And it had a couple of different names along the way. But the one experience I remember very well was an AC Nielsen project. That one was 54 locations around the world. And we were rolling out software, ERP systems. Well, you're saying, okay, 54 locations around the world, we've got 1 year to do this, how are we going to pull this off? Well, the first thing is I found individuals within the company that could speak different languages, that had different cultural backgrounds, because we just can't go into 54 locations around the world and say, hi, we're from the States, listen to what we say, and you'll be great. It doesn't work that way, right? I remember one situation, we were in Sweden, and we had a project timeline. Well, we forgot to ask, how many weeks or months of vacation do you get where the whole project goes away, all the project team members go away, and we can't do anything. So you have to know these things. Or you have to know where the holidays are. You have to understand the cultures. So people coming to this country who want and are in management and leadership, you have to understand this culture just as we have to understand the other cultures. And so that was quite it was very successful. We got the project done on time, on budget, and we didn't upset anybody along the way, which was most important. So the client was happy. So that's something that was quite memorable there. At IBM, there was another one, Lucent Technologies. We did a larger project, same thing, worldwide rollout, same issues. But we also had other issues. Example, we needed a server in Australia and none was available. So what do you do? Well, I called my teams around the world and said, we'd have to have a server tomorrow. Well, we found one. Somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody got us a server from England. Once again, it's that international cooperation, that people who know those various cultures and how to get through all those red tape things helped us out. That one was also very successful. Once again, I populated the team with folks from different countries. The UK, Singapore, Australia, Colombia, because we needed to understand how to go into an operation, spend only a few weeks' time, and get the systems put in.
So what's your role at that?
You know, both of those, I was the managing partner for those projects, which meant I got a lot of frequent flyer miles. It was a lot of fun. So, but I learned lessons along the way of how to talk to people, how to listen to people. At every location we would go in, we wouldn't simply say, okay, we're here, listen to us. We would sit down and say, here is the system. What do you think? What issues are you having today? Do you think this will help you? What questions you have, what concerns you have, and then we would go execute. So I've learned over the years, extremely important that people talk back and forth and that people listen. You know, good leaders listen and then make decisions. So that was that one. In consulting, sort of a reverse situation here. We did a project in Zurich for Credit Suisse. And at that point, I was a partner at KPMG. So we brought individuals from the States to help out with the project. Well, we set them down and try to explain you're going to a different culture. And they go, it's Switzerland. What's the big deal? It's Switzerland. Well, there is a big deal. So some of the individuals we took over to Zurich to help out, as well as folks throughout Europe, couldn't understand that their local TV or the TV program they liked to watch all the time wasn't on TV. They couldn't understand that, well, don't I get a rental car every day because I got to drive 2 blocks back and forth in the hotel? And you've got public transportation, so why not take public transportation? So we had a reverse cultural situation where some individuals from this country couldn't understand why another country wasn't just like theirs. A few of those folks didn't last on the project, to say the least. Again, it was a successful project. So it's the ability to truly understand and deliver not only here but around the world is what I've been involved in for many, many years. And understanding how to do it really helps. So, back in 2000, I left KPMG and started my own practice. And it's still going, so that's the good news. A lot of projects. I first started out with business process outsourcing. And that was a time when the business process piece was a bit shaky. I mean, well, it was just in the early stages. Technology outsourcing had been happening for a long time, okay? Well, how do you make this happen? Well, you've got to take some leadership. You've got to take some initiative. You've got to take some risks. Because when I started my own company, the first thing I said was, why am I doing this? I could stay with a big firm and not take the risk. Well, I wanted to be an entrepreneur. One of the things you have to do is take a risk. You have to have some initiative. You got to be a self-starter, okay? You got to work or want to work for yourself. Those are all plus, you know, so I said, let's do it. Those are pluses. So there are some downsides with doing your own, being an entrepreneur. But, so I started the firm. I immediately go to, well, where's the first place you go? India, Philippines. Find out about outsourcing, understand the industry. And because of that, we were able to establish some standards in the industry that outsourcing is still using today, because it was like the old Wild West in the United States. It was a new industry, not a lot of standards. So in cooperation with several governments, as well as institutions, we were able to put together some standards. But the part that was interesting is when you would ask someone in the United States, they would say, we want to outsource. And we'd say, fine. Any idea where you want to go? Well, that's your job. Okay. Well, I can get you the best deal in this country or this country. Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure that the language or that we would understand them or they would understand us. And, you know, so you have all these biases. So you had to break those down. You had to show people that, in fact, there are people around the world that can do probably a better job than some of your people, okay? But you have to, you don't have that point of reference. I moved, and I was doing a project with United Airlines, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but part of the project was to move some operations from, for example, Dublin to Poland. The workforce was equal, the costs were less. I could get more languages in Poland because it was in a university city than I could outside of Dublin. But there was always a concern about language. And what I discovered over the years that accents really don't matter, it's the results you get. So if I call up to a helpline and I get my answer, I get my problem solved, I'm happy. If I don't, then I'll probably complain that I can't understand the person on the phone. So you have to really understand what the consumer is looking for. So I also moved United's operation from Hong Kong to Shanghai. It was the back office operation, the accounting, the finance, and all that, because we've got a better financial deal. So that was a lot of fun, by the way. I thoroughly enjoyed Shanghai. So
When was that?
that would have been 04, I believe, 04, 05, yeah. So that was a lot of fun, to say the least. And I've created all kinds of methodologies and things that I've got here, but I think those were the key things. Now here's another thing we'll go through on United. Let me call your attention to that. I saved $197 million out of United's cost. So I went into the CEO's office. You got about 30 seconds before they boot you out. So I asked the question, are you the best airline in the world? He goes, well, we're trying, okay? I said, so are you doing anything in your operation that's keeping you from being the best? He thought for a minute, he goes, I don't know. And I said, well, in analyzing your operation, you're spending close to $200 million on things that do not help your airlines to be the best it could be. So at that point, he didn't throw me out of the office, so it was good. He said, okay, please explain more. Well, that led to 13 different projects and saving $197 million. One of which was, and I mentioned the customer service, we moved offshore, some of it. But the lessons we learned offshore, we brought back to this country to improve their operation. And the key was, in outsourcing, find those companies that do the job better than you and use their expertise. Shift the work to them. Take your money, take your $200 million and make your airline better. That's your core business. So that was interesting. There's one that's a bit more local that I just finished. This is Genuine Parts, the Napa folks. That one we did shared services. So we had operations out in the field. Again, it's back office. And we found it's better to pull them together into 2 shared service centers. Now that's all in the U.S., so nothing is outside the U.S. But the opportunity to save $16 million just by moving the operation around, we had to do that. Now, in doing that, we obviously lost people in all of the other locations. We transferred people, but you have to understand how to work with every person at every operation all around the world. So that's key in moving these things and making the savings that we did. So, let me just kind of go through some keys that I've learned over years. One, early on, there's many different cultures. You have to understand that. When you go into an operation like us, you can't assume the big American, listen to me, I know all the answers. Well, you don't. So it's just this multicultural. You guys working here obviously need to understand our cultures. And I say cultures with an S because it's north, south, east, west. There's a lot of different ones that float around. But then taking the advantage of your background, understanding the culture here, I think you can pull them together and actually excel beyond where you may have thought you could. Okay? The other thing is you got to listen to people before you just jump out and take action. Because quite often, especially as a consultant, you're going to get a better answer than what you had to begin with by listening to the people in the operation. So that's another one. Manage your career. Don't let it float along. Reinvent yourself. Like I said, I'm working on my next one. I think I'm going to be a Van Gogh. Not really, but I may take a lot of pictures of Van Gogh's paintings, but I'd probably not do that. So, I don't know if that helps or not, but give you an idea of what I've done and what I've learned.
So, the question I have is, since you are American, and what I heard is you become humble and listen to others, but there is some kind of stereotype for the Chinese or Asian people incorporating American, like those people, like Chinese or Asian, they listen too much and they don't talk too much. They are not aggressive enough, and it's just some kind of opposite to what you learn. Like we always heard, if you want to be more successful, you need to learn the American culture and you need to do things in American ways. So how can you, can you give us some advice on that, and how could we be more successful?
Well, I think you make a great point. Understanding what works in the culture you're in now is extremely important. Now, inside you, you're going to have things you do well and things you don't do well. So you need to understand what those are. What are your traits? Do you do public speaking? Don't you do public speaking? If you're in a meeting, do you listen, and then you want to say something at the end, but then the meeting's over? Whoops. Okay. In our culture, and in the companies you work with, which has their own culture, you got to understand what makes a success, and then try to work on doing that. If I go to Colombia or Brazil or wherever, I know that I can't just barge in and get a meeting with the managing director. I have to go through a protocol, and I have to wait and be recognized. Now, that may not be part of my normal way of doing things, but if I don't do it, then I'm not going to be successful. So I try to understand those successful traits and then adopt them if at all possible, or work on getting better at it. So in some companies, people who are in meetings and listen, and they say something in the end, works. And other cultures, other companies, it doesn't. But the main thing is understand what's needed. Does that help?
So you have an interesting career path, from human resources to software.
Mm-hmm.
But do you actually know much about software development? I mean, yeah, you do.
No, I know about how to apply it
Okay.
to business.
So you don't actually write any code, anything like that. But
No.
do you find that? Do you think it's an advantage to managing software projects? And I'm sure a lot of people work in the software related industry here. So, like 80% of people saying that 80% of software projects will fail, right? Because it's complicated. Because people, it's intangible. People cannot touch it, so you cannot see it.
Right.
So from somebody like you who doesn't really understand, the nitty-gritty of stuff, so do you think that's an advantage or is a disadvantage to software?
It's probably a bit of a disadvantage, but let me say this, and okay, don't laugh, but if someone programmed it to begin with, someone can change it,
Okay.
but it costs money to change it, and the clients may not want to pay the money to change it. To me, in the software engagement, the biggest thing to know is it's great if you know all the technology and all the lines of code and stuff. That's an advantage, but it still has to apply to a business. So understanding the business application, understanding what the software can do, understanding how it will help the people in that business is also part of that. If you just stay strictly with the technology, you're going to miss a big piece. So I don't program, or the last language I programmed I don't think is known to man. It was Chiseled on Rock or something, but that doesn't mean I can't manage the project, because it's really the business application is what the client is buying. How will it help my business?
Thank you, John. Yeah, we will leave the Q&A at the later part because we have another great presentation. So we're going to, can hold questions for most of them. Okay. So thank you very much, John, for your great insights and experience you shared with everybody.
All right.
Now please allow me to introduce our second great speaker, Richard Teeters. Colonel Richard Teeters, Jr. retired in 1998 after 30 years active duty in the U.S. Army. His demonstrated proficiencies lies in strategic management and leadership, finance and accounting, and sales and marketing. Upon his retirement, he became a professor of management at Kennesaw State University with expertise in project management, leadership, and entrepreneurship. While at Kennesaw State, he currently serves as the director of the Center for Industrial Collaboration. As the director of the CIC, he evaluated over 400 science and technological innovations and took an active role in assisting in the commercialization of more than 20 technologies. As an entrepreneur, he has served in the capacity of president of 2 high-tech startups. He's the founder and executive director of the Center for Accountable Leaders, a Coast College of Business Center of Excellence. So now let's welcome Richard. Thank you.
Well, I didn't know I was supposed to give a personal history, but if personal histories are important, I was raised since the age of 4 years old in Saudi Arabia. And I can, if you want to talk about the Saudi Arabs and their development from the 30s on to today, we can have that conversation at a later date. But what I wanted to do today, since the topic was leadership and career paths, was really approach it from probably where you're sitting and your perspective. And the only way I can do that is to use the experiences of other people. At the Center for Accountable Leaders, what I've done is I've sort of broken tradition with the normal people who research leadership and the traits of leaders and things like that. If you really want to get into the granular detail of what constitutes leaders and what people expect out of leaders and things of that nature, I would defer to Professors Kuntz and Posner, who for 30 years have really documented what people around the world think leaders are and what they should be and how you should act. So I don't want to get in their way. But what I did in my research is I said, I'm not going to ask any questions. I'm not going to try to find the solutions to what I want when I do the research. And I just ask leaders to tell me their life stories. And what I've learned is not in the textbooks yet. And hopefully what I've learned will be available to others in the not too distant future. In 2005, at his lecture at the commencement at Stanford University, Steve Jobs, knowing that he was dying of cancer, talked about you cannot connect the dots going forward in life. However, he did say that you can take the dots of your life up to this point as setting the example for what might happen in the future. Now, if you're an economist and you're really into the mathematics of economy, you know that no economist can take the data points of the past, put a standard deviation on it, and project it in the future. That's how things are going to be in the future. Normally, usually, generally, people like that lose a lot of money in the stock market. But what was important about this lecture is I didn't learn about the lecture, this part of the lecture, until very recently, because I was using dots as part of explaining what I've learned. What I've learned is that people who are in the human relations business, people who are in the business of corporate development, the IBMs of the world will tell you, if you join my profession, if you join my company, there is a career path that will take you to the top. And if you do well at each one of these stages, we'll honor you and we will recognize you and we will promote you to the next position up.
Great.
What was interesting about this professional background is that one of the gentlemen that I interviewed was recommended by the chairman of IBM. This gentleman had never gotten above a district management level. Now, he was the district manager of New York City, which, I mean, if you have a district, that's a pretty good testament to your ability to represent IBM. But what he told me was that when he joined IBM, there were 19 things that he had to do to become the chairman of the board of IBM Corporation, and he did every one of those 19 things. And I said, well, how come you're not the chairman of the board? He said, they changed the 19 things. So that was part of the basic theme, is that the best laid plans are just plans. They're what you, based upon what you know now, what you're looking forward, their plans. And for those people who, some of the questions I picked up a little earlier, if you're an entrepreneur, plans don't necessarily, your career plans don't necessarily apply. If you're entrepreneurial in technologies, career plans don't necessarily apply. But if you work in large organizations that have come out of these massive entrepreneurial engines, they do apply. And so the other truths basically are two parts. The first section up there really comes from John Kotter. John Kotter is the former professor at Harvard Business School, and is literally the person who, when it comes to knowing what individuals do in the process of becoming leaders, he is documented. I mean, there are a lot of people who theorize, there are a lot of people who say, oh, based upon my experience, this is the way things are. But he's, over the years, a good 50 years now, he has actually documented in great detail how people have evolved. And one of his studies was based upon the class in 1974 at Harvard Business School at the MBA level, and he found over a 20-year period that, oh, by the way, graduates who thought their career commitment was something were completely changed, and through no fault of their own. What they found is that they would get to an organization, or they would have a relationship, and they would have a confrontation, a significant confrontation with an individual, and they said, I have to leave this business. Well, oftentimes in business, you're known to other businesses and other relationships, and so they would actually go someplace to a different industry, different countries and things of that nature. And then they would run into organizational things. People who want to be IBMers find out that very shortly that maybe IBM isn't the place for them. And so there's an internal corporate cultural conflict that caused them to change. But eventually, they all end up someplace where they're very, very comfortable. And this is an important part, because this starts to show up in a lot of things, more than the work that I'm doing. It's starting to show up, and I think it's becoming so prevalent that it's worth investigating at the individual level. If you do nothing else, if you take nothing else out of today, get a copy of Jim Collins' book, Great by Choice. And the reason for this is that after, Jim is the guy that wrote the book, Built to Last, Good to Great, and after, when Good to Great was published, he was at dinner, and the managing partner of McKinsey and Company was at the dinner table with him, and they were on a different subject. And so Jim asked the partner at McKinsey, says, well, what did you think of my book? He said, it's okay, but it really didn't address really superbly excellent organizations. So they literally put aside nearly 20 years of research. They took 20 years of detailed research, pushed it aside,